Our next speaker will be former Attorney General Eric Holder. Mr. Holder served as Attorney General of the United States from February 2009 to April 2015 as the third longest serving Attorney General in the United States history and the first African American to hold that office. Mr. Holder is an internationally recognized leader in a broad range of regulatory enforcement, criminal justice, national security issues. He is currently a partner at Covington Burling, including his tenure as Attorney General. Mr. Holder has served in government for more than 30 years, having been appointed to various positions requiring U.S. Senate confirmation by Presidents Obama, Clinton, and Reagan. Welcome.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
It is an honor for me to be here today. I'm usually in hearings with Congressman Cummings in a different setting, so this is actually going to be pretty pleasant, I think. It's an honor to be here today to have an important conversation about knocking down barriers and creating opportunity for every American, no matter what neighborhood you grow up in. And I think it is impossible to have a comprehensive conversation about the barriers holding back our youth, particularly in the African American community, without talking about what's happening in our criminal justice system. Today we have, I think, a historic opportunity to improve justice in America if we're willing to take action. A rare consensus has emerged in favor of criminal justice reform. Too many of our sentencing laws and procedures are vastly out of date and they're unfair, and enough people have come to recognize the need for reform to finally make a difference. Meaningful action is sorely needed. It is time for this party. It is time for this party to lead. Since the 1970s, the United States incarceration rate has nearly quintupled. We imprison far more people per capita than even Russia does. A quarter of the world's prisoners are Americans, and we make up only 5% of the world's population. And a terrifyingly disproportionate number of those prisoners are African American men. Now, with unnecessarily harsh mandatory minimum sentences in place for low-level drug offenders, there's not much of a chance for the criminal justice system to function as it should. And the purely punitive results of such hardline policies have bred both distrust as well as disparity. Criminal justice reform was not a major part of the Democratic Party's 2008 or 2012 platforms, but 2016 needs to be different. It's time for us to take this issue seriously and to make it a shared priority. Now, we know that reforms work. The Justice Department's Smart on Crime program, announced in 2013, oversaw the first net reduction of the federal prison population in 32 years. Crime, as well as incarceration rates, went down together for the first time in nearly 40 years. Because there was a willingness to take the needed steps and to invest in rehabilitation, reentry, and reducing recidivism. But these first steps are really just that, first steps. It's time to build upon and make permanent these gains through legislative action in Congress and in individual states and cities nationwide. Now, this issue transcends party lines. Bipartisan support exists for reforms like substantially revising mandatory minimum sentencing, incentivizing good behavior, and supporting those who are reentering society. Unlikely alliances among stakeholders abound. Senators Mike Lee, Patrick Leahy, Dick Durbin, Rand Paul, and Cory Booker all agree. They've all united in their view to reform our criminal justice system and to break down barriers and replace them with ladders of opportunity. And that should tell you a lot about the fierce urgency of criminal justice reform. We cannot let this moment pass us by. Half measures and stopgaps are not enough. It may be another generation before we have an opportunity for reform again. And the longer that we wait, the likelier it is that those pandering to this country's worst instincts will get their way. Even now, some in the Republican Party, to me, incredibly contend that we have, and I quote, an under-incarceration problem. Under-incarceration problem, unquote. Now, the incontrovertible fact is that there is not a tension between reform and public safety. In fact, evidence-based reform makes us a safer and more just nation. This is not a partisan issue. It's not a special interest issue. It's a means of building the fairer, more efficient, and more effective criminal justice system that our nation needs and deserves. Tradition defines the past. Action defines the future. And that's why going forward, Democrats must lead the change. We cannot hold on to policies whose value is found largely in their longevity, especially when the system as presently constructed devastates so much of our country's social, moral, and economic fabric along the way. Now, let me be very clear. We have no intention of compromising public safety nor allowing offenders to go unpunished. Rather, we're calling for a new approach that will keep us secure, reduce costs, and promote fairness in the future. Reform has not made us any less safe. That is a simple fact, and it's high time that we enacted more of it. Change happens when we demand progress. So in 2016, let's make our voices heard in favor of a system that truly offers justice for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Congressman Nelson.
General Holder, thank you so much for your presentation. I think it's incredibly timely and very important. And you're right, it is a bipartisan issue and we should seize it. Could you talk a little bit about helping people who have gone through the criminal justice system be able to get back into the system of voting? As a prosecutor, would you rather chase people who have voted perhaps unwittingly but still improperly, or go after people who really are maybe a threat to public safety? What role does felon reenfranchisement play in moving forward criminal justice reform?
Well, as Attorney General, I stated my belief that those people who have completed their sentences should be given the right to vote. Studies have been conducted that indicate that that is an important part of the rehabilitation process. Once you have paid your debt to society, I believe you should be welcomed back and allowed the right to vote.
Zogby, Dr. Zogby.
Attorney General Holder, this is an issue you and I have spoken about before. It's separate from the testimony, but I know you worked hard during your tenure to revise the Attorney General Ashcroft's racial profiling guidelines. 2 years out from the end of your tenure, are you concerned about the fact that we still need more reform on racial profiling, in particular because racial mapping of neighborhoods can continue, and because there still is the ability of law enforcement, Border Patrol, to single out individuals based on their religion, their ethnicity, or their race for surveillance, even in instances where there's no direct evidence of criminal wrongdoing?
I mean, I think we certainly made progress while I was Attorney General. I don't. There's no question, however, that further examination of this particular issue, I think, needs to continue. It is my view that predicate-based law enforcement action is law enforcement at its best. It is most effective in that way. It is most efficient, and it is most just.
Would you suggest then that in our platform that we use language to further reform the racial profiling guidelines?
I certainly think that is something that ought to be examined. We should certainly balance the concerns that you raised against the national security needs that we have and that are real. Unfortunately, we live in a world where there are people outside our borders and within our borders who would do harm to the American people. And so I think we need to try to find the right balance that needs to be struck. But the concerns that you raise, I think, are indeed real ones.
Thank you.
Dr. West.
Well, Attorney General, I first want to salute you for your public service over the years. You did it with great style and dignity. And your defense of voting rights, I think, was exemplary. But my concern is that when we talk about criminal justice, oftentimes we initially look downward rather than upward. I agree with you that we have to have reform when it comes to our police to make sure policemen are accountable, and some would actually have to go to jail after a fair trial. But looking upward, and I'm thinking about the fact that some of us believe that there's not an equal application of rule of law to Wall Street as opposed to Main Street. When you look at market manipulation, insider trading, predatory lending, fraudulent activities, how can we ensure, as we write this platform, that we have got some serious law enforcement when it comes to crime on Wall Street or other high places, not out of a sense of revenge, but out of a deep commitment to justice?
I think that's a very legitimate question, and let me let's cut through, I mean, you're being polite. I think that people were critical of my Justice Department for not going after people in Wall Street. There was that I would say that misperception. And I think the question you all need to ask yourselves as you consider this is, if we could have made those cases, do you think we would not have? You know? Do you think that the very aggressive United States attorneys I was proud to serve with would not have brought these cases if they didn't have that ability? One of the things I said as I left the Department of Justice was that there needs to be an examination of the standards of proof that needs to be met in connection with these economic crime cases and whether or not that standard of proof is too high. That, I think, is something that ought to be considered by this platform committee so that the impediments that we faced in trying to bring those cases against the highest level people might not have to be faced by a future Attorney General, a future Department of Justice. But I will say that the concerns that have been expressed about what we did or didn't do, I think are in many ways misplaced. It was not lack of desire, lack of resources. We had, in some cases, statutory and sometimes factual inabilities to bring the cases that we wanted to bring.
Ms. Lee, Congresswoman Lee.
Thank you very much. Good to see you, Mr. Attorney General. Yes, let me just thank you for your exemplary service. I wanted to ask you about, there are three issues that some of us have been working on for many, many years as it relates to formerly incarcerated drug felons. There are lifetime bans as it relates to eligibility for Pell Grants, for SNAP, food stamp benefits, and for public housing assistance. Only for formerly incarcerated drug felons. How do you see that as in the scheme of things, and especially for this party, if we really are committed to supporting reentry efforts and ensuring that equal access to a safety net, which is needed upon reentry? How do we handle that from this platform and drafting committee?
Well, I would think that, I would hope that you would get experts who would come to testify about what the needs are of people who are trying to reenter society. One of the things that I asked state attorneys general to do was to look at the restrictions they had in place at the state level, as we did at the federal level, to make sure that these restrictions were law enforcement needed, law enforcement related, and were not excessively punitive and ultimately self-defeating. If you have people who are coming out of the system and sincere in their attempts to rehabilitate themselves, re-enter society, why do we put up these unnecessary barriers, the three that you mentioned? What is the purpose of that, and especially to single out drug offenders? So I would hope that an examination could be made of the impediments that are placed in front of people who want to re-enter society, and that I hope this party, my party, would stand behind in this criminal justice reform effort, reducing, if not eliminating, those barriers so that people can remake their lives.
Ms. Tandon.
Thank you. I would like to just build on Dr. West's comments and ask, it sounds like from your perspective there are additional steps from a policy perspective we could look at to address some of the concern that people have raised about prosecutions in Wall Street. There is a lot of anger in the country around the challenges we've seen over the last few years. So are there thoughts you have on things that we as a committee should look at? Because I know this has been a concern across the party.
Yeah, there have been, I mean, I can certainly share with you speeches that I gave that
Yes.
Talked about altering those standards of proof. So that's certainly one place. That would be one man's opinion. I would hope you would think it would be an informed one. But there are other papers that have certainly been written, research I think that could be done relatively quickly to look at ideas that people had proposed to deal with the issues that we've confronted in the Justice Department during my time as Attorney General.
Thank you so much.
Ms. Reese.
Thank you. I want to also commend you for your work, and thank you for coming to Ohio during difficult times. I want to kind of get back to the main street of what I've been hearing, because I come from the state of Sam Dubose, Tamir Rice, John Crawford, and Tanisha Anderson. And I want to get back to your point about us not having criminal justice in our platform in the last, 8 years, and now that particularly for African Americans, that and economics are the two biggest issues in our party that we're voting almost 90%. Can you talk about, you talked about racial profiling and data collection, and I know we've been working with you, the Ohio Legislative Black Caucus, and in Cincinnati, where I'm from, the collaborative agreement. You're familiar with that. Do you see that, maybe the collaborative being a component with an additive of grand jury reform? Because that's been the big thing I've been hearing, that we go in and we get no indictment. Do you think that is there a way to have a statement that incorporates comprehensive criminal justice reform?
Yeah, that's a very complicated question, because we're dealing with a couple of systems here, the federal system and then the state systems. And there are different rules, obviously, state as opposed to federal, and then within the states there is a great degree of variability. I know that in the federal system, our Civil Rights Division would like to have been involved in some of those cases, but again, the standard of proof that was set back in the 60s when the civil rights statutes were passed that we used to look at police misconduct cases, for instance. The standard is, I think, entirely too high. You have to come up with show that there was a willful intention to affect somebody's civil rights, a specific intent to do that. And I don't think that standard of proof, I think it's unnecessarily high. And again, I spoke about that and can share with you the thoughts that I had about lowering that standard of proof to make it make the resources of the federal government more accessible in connection with those kinds of cases.
Our last question, Ms. Parker.
Yes, thank you. Good to see you again, Honorable Holder. In the early 90s, through the University of Washington, I worked on a study entitled Racial Disproportionality in the Juvenile Justice System. I'm still concerned with how Native American, African American, and Hispanic youth, how they've been disproportionately treated for the same crime committed. They receive longer sentencing. How can we change how we engage with youth in need of these types of services?
Yeah, I think we did a lot of good work on that in the Obama administration. More work remains to be done. Arnie Duncan was a great partner in that effort. There's a study from the University of Texas, I believe, that looked at the system in Texas. And I don't mean to pick on Texas, but I thought the work that they did in this study was actually very good. And it showed that for Hispanic kids, black kids, and interestingly, disabled kids, they were much more likely for the same offense to end up in a police precinct as opposed to the principal's office. And I think that then puts them on a pipeline. We talk about this, school to prison pipeline. We talk about it a lot. But talking about it a lot doesn't mean that it's not real. I mean, that is something that affects too many of our young people's lives. And I think that study about that problem and coming up with concrete ways in which that might be dealt with and putting this party behind the notion of stopping that school to prison pipeline is a place where I think we should be.
Thank you.
Mr. Attorney General, I want to thank you. Just one thing, in Baltimore, we've had our problems. And, one of the things that I live in the inner city, and it's not a day that goes by that somebody doesn't come up to me and say something to the effect that they have a record and they cannot get a job. And going back to some of the things Congresswoman Lee was asking about, how they're blocked everywhere. And it's almost like they want to do for their families, and they will literally tell me that I got to feed my family and I'm going to do something. And what they mean is they're going to commit a crime. I think you're right. We have to not only have the criminal justice reform, but we got to make sure that mayors and governors and private industry, we need to help find ways for people to get jobs, because I think that's going to make a big difference. Because it's one thing for them to be on the street, it's another thing for them to have an opportunity for a job and a career. Would you agree?
No, I think that's absolutely right. And understand where I'm coming from. I'm a career prosecutor.
Right.
And I think that people need to be held accountable for the crimes that they commit. But our system of justice needs to be proportional in administering punishment. We should not, as I said in the speech announcing the Smart on Crime program, we shouldn't simply warehouse people and then forget them. the problem that you talk about is real. The need for ways in which we allow people coming out of the system to find work so that they can support themselves in legitimate ways. Things like banning the box. I mean, there are practical kinds of things that I think could be part of a platform that this party should proudly stand behind. And at the end of the day, take it from this career prosecutor. That is good law enforcement. This is not some feel-good exercise. This is good law enforcement. It cuts down on recidivism rates. It keeps us safer. It makes us spend less money on our criminal justice system. If we invest a little up front, we will save tons of money downstream.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.